I'm first of all happy that it has happened. I like my avocados. I like less expensive cars, all of that, and I think that's a good thing. But I'm afraid that we have here set a precedent that's kind of dangerous, namely that you have that President Trump thinks that he can use tariffs for basically any topic he wants to, that he wants agreement upon. And then what that actually means is that no country in the world will trust the United States with any agreement because, of course, tariffs and the free trade agreement, which is NAFTA still at this point, has nothing to do with immigration. And so, changing one thing for another is actually, I think, a very, very bad precedent to set for this kind of for this kind of politics, because what it means is that essentially the United States will never be trusted in whatever agreement it has, because it might go back on it for something else that has nothing to do with it. So in that sense, I'm very disappointed. But on the other hand, I'm happy that we have avoided this escalating tension with Mexico. Of course, I don't know what the actual agreement is. Nobody knows at this point, so we'll see what, in fact, it actually brings or not.
So actually, we are getting some details on that particular declaration. The declaration says Mexico will deploy the National Guard throughout its border, throughout Mexico, with priority on its southern border. It says Mexico will take decisive action to dismantle human smuggling organizations. And it also says the U.S. will expand the program, sending asylum seekers back to Mexico to await, presumably for their asylum cases to be heard. I want to come at this from the point of Mexico and the difficult position they've been in during these negotiations, because obviously the tariffs would have hurt them tremendously. But what can you tell us about what they'll now be dealing with on their side of the border?
Well, one thing that we do know from a little bit earlier is that Mexico had promised to take at least 6,000 troops to its southern border with Guatemala, so that it would be able to regulate the flow of human beings farther north. And I think that's probably one of the major components. The rest we have to see, because, of course, what this really means is how does it fit the Mexican Constitution itself? And obviously, presumably, the Mexican government follows its own constitution, regardless of what the United States says. I think the other part that's actually quite significant is the fact that Mexico takes on the burden of maintaining the asylum seekers in Mexico rather than in the United States, or letting them pass into the United States. And I think this is really one of the major issues. It's really hard to tell right now because it's still very general. We'd have to look at the agreement in its details. I can promise you I'll do that when we actually have the exact written details. But certainly this is something that I think in many ways Mexico feels dishonored in many ways, because they've been bullied by the United States again.
Eric, a lot of critics of President Trump say that the president has created the crisis along the U.S.'s southern border with Mexico through his immigration policies. They say that what that's done is it's encouraged more migrants to cross the southern border. Do you think, and I mean, I want to just point out the fact that those numbers have increased over the past month. In May, they were up crossings were up 32%. Do you think that this is going to encourage or discourage migrants coming from Central America to still attempt going into Mexico and crossing into the United States? Or do you think that this is going to do more to mitigate that?
Well, we really don't know, because I think there's another calculus that the migrants take. In other words, what is worse? Is it being in Guatemala or in Honduras or El Salvador being threatened by MS-13 members or gang members, and for fear of their lives, or is it worth it still to try to come to the United States? And unless the calculus for them is that it is safer to stay at home, which is kind of hard to think that that might be the case, they will keep coming. I think also one of the things is that what Trump has done is actually permitted the Central Americans to, if you will, game the system by bringing children, then asking for asylum, not trying to cross the border in areas that are unpatrolled, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's really why we have such numbers, is because it's now possible, actually, and Trump made this possible, for more and more people to come up because they figured out how they can get in. Now, whether that calculus changes now with the fact that they have to remain in Mexico, and keep in mind that Ciudad Juarez, Tijuana, and other cities are some of the most dangerous cities in all of Mexico and in all of North America, that's something we have to see.